This evening to discuss the issues raised by our film a little earlier. We have Humera Khan from the Muslim Women's Group and ISA, and from our central London studios, Sher Khan, the Chair of Public Affairs Committee at the Muslim Council of Great Britain. Thank you very much indeed both for joining us this evening on the eve of the memorial. A good time really to reflect on what lessons may have been learnt. Humera, what has been learned in your view?
I think certainly what it did, it forced the government, it forced the community, and it forced a variety of people to stop and say, look, we haven't been talking to each other, we haven't been understanding each other. And I think from my personal experience was that really a lot of stepping back from our personal idiosyncrasies to say, no, this is beyond our personal feelings right now, and we've got to look beyond that.
Sher Khan, what's been achieved? What concrete could you put your finger on for us tonight?
I don't know if I can necessarily give you a concrete example of achievement, because I think there's still a long way to go. I think much more analysis is required. There are some basic pieces of information which the government has tried to acquire through these task force groups and so on. But what we're calling for, of course, is something more comprehensive, like a public inquiry, to look into the whole process and how we ended up where we did in a sort of more analytical way.
That's a very important point, and one which was raised by our film too, of course, that a lot of people in that area that my colleague tried to speak to were simply in denial. They were in that sort of phase of not really getting to grips with the fact that this stemmed from their own community at all. I mean, until there's that sense of connection, nothing's going to be achieved, surely.
Well, I think the first thing to note is, and the feedback we've had from our affiliates on the ground, is that the community feels the pressure of the huge media attention that's been placed on them, and there is a common belief that they feel victims of being tarred with this brush of terrorism because of the actions of the few. And there is of course a natural reaction to look inwards, but what we have to do is think about how is it we're going to connect with these communities, how is it that we're going to make sure that the events or the circumstance in which they find themselves leads to these sort of situations, how are we going to deal with that? And for that, as I said, I think it needs a much more of a comprehensive approach. The government has made a start, and that's very welcome, but I think a lot more needs to be done.
We'll talk a bit further about what that actually might mean in a moment. Humera, do you think there's some blame here, actually, within the community itself, that it allowed something like this to arise and manifest itself in so dreadful a manner?
I don't think you can blame the community itself, because the community itself is not guilty, because the individuals who felt that they had to do such a crime basically are individuals literally, and they acted on their own. And it saddens all of us in the community that a tiny handful, hardly negligible number have been seen to represent the entire community. And I think that while the community has a responsibility to redress what is obviously the problem now, I think government also needs to take its responsibility of saying that this is a community we've not understood, we've ignored it in the past, and we've got to sort of really get down and do something tangible for the future.
What is there, though, that could be done in a community like that? I mean, you're a representative of a women's group. There's a whole element of Muslim society that could be sort of mobilised to work on this problem. Is there a route there for the community to do something for itself?
I think what the community really needs to do is to develop its own expertise. It needs to be engaged in a variety of social activities. It needs to develop a voluntary sector. It needs to develop arenas where it can have its say and represent itself, and also have its specific needs met. It needs a variety of different things, and some of it needs to do on its own, and certainly, but a large amount of it really must be facilitated by government.
I should turn to you, Sher Khan, on the point about whether you actually indeed are part of the problem with the Muslim Council of Great Britain. It doesn't represent the sort of feelings and dual identities that many of these disaffected young men are feeling. Are you actually hindering the problem in that way, do you think? Do you genuinely, you can't possibly speak for them?
Well, I mean, I think I'd like the evidence, that we're part of the problem. In terms of representing people, I mean, we've never said that we represent everybody. We're a representative body. We're probably the most representative in terms of our outreach. But I don't think we have ever said we speak for every single Muslim in the country. I think what's more important is to focus on what the issues are. We will do the best we can with the resources we have, and everyone else who feels that we're not doing enough should go out and do some work and try to address the problem themselves. I think we need all the help we can get. We are a voluntary organisation. People have day jobs and they come and do this out of concern for their community. And I don't think you can expect any more than that. But I do think there is one other point I'd like to bring up, which is that if we are going to deal with this situation, then what we need to do is to look at it in a comprehensive way. And what I mean by that is that there are several factors that lead to an atmosphere which these sort of incidences can arise, you know, the atmospheres that are conducive to this. And we need to break it down as to see how this is occurring. There are a number of factors, like, for example, yes, there are people who preach and misrepresent the teachings of Islam. That is something we need to look at. But then what is the context in which people fall for these misguidance? This could be to do with poverty, with representation, and a whole array of other issues. One of them is, of course, a sense of alienation. Why do the Muslim community, or certainly significant parts of the Muslim community, feel, you know, disengaged and not part of the wider society? There's a lot of issues there that we need to look at.
Well, we should just mention that we're showing some of our Beeston images this evening, inside and behind the scenes at Beeston, as we were filming today. But is there a question to be posed here about why some of the fundamentalist extremist groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir are attracting young men and organisations like yours aren't, Sher Khan? What do they provide that you don't?
Well, again, you know, we've really got to look at the numbers. It is very easy to say that, but I would suggest that the numbers within the Hizb ut-Tahrir is very marginal in terms of numbers, and our outreach is significantly more. But I think that's something I think you've got to investigate rather than just have me say that. Of course, there are people who are attracted to that message that they teach, and it's a very important, even though there might be a few, the risk of what can happen as a result of listening to those voices is very significant. And there is a lot of anger out there. The youth are very angry at how they are treated, not just within British society, but of course foreign affairs plays a big part. There are those who manipulate them. They're able to manipulate many of these youngsters because of the circumstances they find themselves in terms of economic circumstance, in a sense of not feeling that they can make their way in society, that they're not really going to be able to find their way into decent professions or be represented or have their voice heard. There's an array of problems that we all need to address, not just Muslim organizations, but also the government. And it's only through addressing those issues and engaging with those angry voices that we can actually you know, try to quell some of these problems.
Well, let's put that point also to Humera about what could be achieved there. I mean, we know some of these extremist groups, there's nothing less than complete withdrawal from Iraq, disenfranchisement of Israel, and all those big political questions. There will ever be enough for some of these groups who are appealing to some of the disaffected young Muslims. What's the way of countering them? Is there any way that the government can make any change?
To answer the question why they're being attracted to such groups is because if you look at the human condition, whether it's Muslim or anybody else, if you're feeling disenfranchised a little bit from the family that you're born into, and then you're feeling you can't connect to what's happening in mainstream society and government, you're looking for alternative families. And for people who had a very low self-esteem of themselves because of various different factors, it's very easy to find an easy rhetoric that talks jihad, talks, you know, about being radical, and you know, and gives you a sense of self-esteem. And while the Muslim experience of that has been this specific thing, which is aggravated by foreign policy and international events, there are other examples of that, of a similar experience in other young groups of young men in particular, whether it be Caribbean young men or working class young men. There is a problem that we have to address as a society as a whole, that we are not engaging young people, we're not providing them with ethical, viable, sustainable family alternatives to where they're feeling engaged.
We're almost out of time. I also just give a brief comment to you both about whether you're optimistic about any levels at all of achievement tonight. Sher Khan.
I mean, we're always optimistic and we've always got to be positive, but I don't think that we should live in denial of the challenge that we face. And therefore, we will always be critical and always challenge authorities when we feel that they're not doing enough. And one of the factors I must also point out is the kind of huge, what I think is very negative media coverage that the community has to endure has also played into the fact of feeling alienated.
Humera, you're nodding in agreement there.
Well, I certainly think I am optimistic always, even though I feel very cautious about a lot of things. And I think the government really must listen to the grassroots initiatives and really focus on that and support it.
Humera Khan from Muslim Women's Group and also Sher Khan from the Muslim Council of Britain. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us this evening. And of course, you can see the memorial service for the victims of the London bombings tomorrow on Sky News at 3 o'clock.